Imagine the absolute pinnacle of victory. Like, just picture that scene in your mind right now.
Right, the classic hero's welcome.
Exactly. It's the parade through the city streets, the confetti dropping from the skyscrapers, the conquered enemy basically handing over the keys to the kingdom. We all know that script, right?
Oh, absolutely. The hero stands on the highest hill, plants the flag, and the crowd just roars.
Yeah, but now I want you to take that exact same concept of, well, ultimate universe-altering victory. And imagine that achieving it actually requires the hero to be stripped naked, publicly humiliated, executed in the most agonizing way conceivable, and then locked in a silent stone box.
It is, I mean, it's the ultimate narrative inversion.
It really is. Today, we are dissecting a stack of texts that claim the ultimate power move in human history was, at least on the surface, a devastating, humiliating defeat.
We are looking at a framework that takes, every single human metric for success, power, and authority, and just completely turns it inside out.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are going on a journey today that is going to aggressively challenge the way you process defeat, how you define power, and honestly, how you understand the concept of waiting in the dark.
Because we like our victories to be undeniable, right? We want the scoreboard lit up. We want systemic dominance.
Exactly. But the source material we are unpacking today argues that true power isn't found in a battle cry, but in a complete, suffocating, terrifying silence.
It's a heavy concept.
Very. We have a fascinating collection of daily reflections in front of us titled Holy Week Through the Frontwood Bible Verses. And along with that, its companion piece, which is this incredibly dense 90-second preview text that maps out a very specific 7-day narrative arc.
Yeah, it maps out what the text itself calls 7 days that changed the trajectory of human history.
Which is quite the claim.
It is a massive claim. Now, before we trace this path, from the shouting crowds of a Sunday parade to the deafening silence of a sealed tomb the following Saturday, we really need to establish exactly how we are approaching this material.
Right, that's crucial.
Because you, the listener, might come from a background where these texts are deeply sacred. Or you might be coming at this from a completely secular, historical, or literary perspective.
And it's vital we lay our analytical cards on the table right away. We aren't here to preach at you.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing a specific theology or trying to convert anyone. Our mission today is to treat these texts with rigorous intellectual curiosity.
We are examining the profound philosophical and psychological claims made inherently within the narrative itself.
Exactly. The text presents this as a deeply personal journey into the heart of a figure who actively traded his life for humanity.
And we are going to look at the architecture of that claim. We're dissecting how the narrative attempts to prove it through a series of radical paradoxes.
Precisely. We are analyzing the mechanics of the story. And the mechanics of this particular story dictate that, well, to understand the incredibly heavy, immovable silence at the end of the week, we first have to examine the overwhelming, unstoppable noise at its beginning.
Yeah, the text initiates this 7-day countdown with an intensely cinematic scene.
It really is.
It pulls from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, describing a man entering the ancient city of Jerusalem.
And the sensory details the text highlights are just fantastic. You can almost feel the dust kicking up. You hear the palm branches hitting the dirt road.
The text describes this eruption of profound, chaotic, almost dangerous joy from the masses.
But the narrative doesn't let that joy sit unchallenged. It immediately introduces a massive conflict.
Right, because you have the crowd and then you have the authorities.
Exactly. The source points out that the religious elite of the city try to stifle this celebration. They essentially tell this teacher, tell your followers to keep it down, shut this noise off.
The historical context here adds so much weight to that panic, too.
Oh, for sure. Set the scene for us.
Well, Jerusalem in the first century was basically a powder keg under Roman occupation. The religious elite weren't just being curmudgeons. They were effectively middle management, and they were terrified of the Roman Empire.
Right, they're just trying to keep their jobs and their lives.
Exactly. A massive, loud, organic crowd crowning a new king is exactly the kind of thing that brings Roman legions down to slaughter everyone. They are desperately trying to maintain the fragile status quo.
But the response from the central figure in the text is staggering.
It really is.
He looks at them and declares that if the people are forced into silence, the very stones on the ground will cry out.
Let's really look at the mechanics of that claim, because it is wild.
It's so bold.
The text is explicitly arguing for a hierarchy of authority that completely bypasses human permission.
It's saying this figure is so inherently worthy of recognition that if you gag the humans, the physical earth will take over the job.
Yes.
It makes me think of an exclusive velvet rope VIP event. The religious leaders view themselves as the bouncers.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
They hold the clipboard, they manage the optics, they decide who gets past the rope, and they definitely control the volume of the music. And this guy walks up and implies that the literal venue, the concrete, the dirt, the architecture, is actively allied against the bouncers.
The VIP venue analogy works so well. But let's push it further into the philosophical realm.
Okay, let's go there.
The text isn't just saying the venue takes over. It's making an ontological claim about who this person actually is. The source argues that Christ's glory isn't derived from the crowd's approval.
So it's not a popularity contest.
Exactly. He isn't a politician whose power relies on poll numbers or a big parade. The text presents him as the creator of the material universe.
Wow.
It argues that all of creation inherently recognizes its architect, even when humanity is, to use the source's exact phrasing, too blind to see.
So the praise isn't an emotional reaction, it's practically a law of physics, like gravity.
That's the perfect way to frame it.
The rocks aren't feeling particularly joyful, they are simply reacting to a fundamental force of nature passing by. And these religious leaders are standing there in the dust, essentially trying to legislate against gravity.
That is exactly the dynamic the text establishes. And if we look at why the text starts here, it speaks volumes about the human tendency to try and gatekeep transcendent experiences.
We do love to gatekeep.
We really do. Throughout history, institutions, whether religious, political, or cultural, have always tried to put a lid on organic movements. They try to dictate the terms of engagement with truth.
And the text just blows past that.
Right. The text is laying down a foundational premise.
Yeah.
There's an inherent, undeniable reality that will find expression, regardless of how hard human institutions try to suppress it. It establishes the central figure as an unstoppable force, not through military might, but through an elemental connection to the fabric of reality.
Which sets up the most jarring whiplash for the very next day in the narrative.
Oh, it really does.
Because Sunday establishes this unstoppable external cosmic noise. But Monday, the text pivots sharply inward.
We move from the macro to the micro.
Right. It moves us to an event it titles Houses of Prayer, based on Mark chapter 11. We are off the dusty road, the parade is over, and we are standing inside the massive physical temple complex.
And the 90-second preview text characterizes what happens next as a holy clearing.
Yeah.
The narrative details Jesus entering the temple, but not to teach peacefully. He begins physically clearing the space, overturning the tables of merchants and money changers.
There's actually chaos in there.
Right, and declaring that the space was designed to be a house of prayer for all the nations, but it has been turned into a den of robbers.
This is such a famously aggressive scene, but I really want to focus on the why that our source material provides.
The motivation is key here.
Because the text explains that this figure isn't just throwing the tantrum. He isn't even just demanding proper worship. I mean, he had a whole city worshiping him 24 hours ago. The source argues that he wants human hearts to be a pure dwelling place. By physically dismantling this marketplace, the text explicitly claims he is making room for the outsider and the seeker.
To fully grasp the psychological impact of this, we have to look at how commodification functioned in that specific first-century temple system.
Okay, unpack that for us.
The area he cleared was likely the court of the Gentiles. This was the only designated space where non-Jewish outsiders, the marginalized, and the curious could actually come to pray.
So it was the one place for the outsiders.
Yes, but the religious establishment had filled that specific area with livestock vendors and currency exchange booths.
Wow.
If you wanted to make a sacrifice, you had to buy a certified, unblemished animal, often at a massive markup, using a specific temple currency that required an exchange fee.
So it wasn't just noisy, it was an extortion racket layered over a spiritual choke point.
Exactly.
The very people who needed access the most were being physically and economically crowded out by a system that had monetized access to the divine.
The temple had become a den of robbers, not solely because the merchants were overcharging, but because the system was robbing people of direct, simple access to God.
Right.
The text argues that true connection requires the aggressive dismantling of these complex, transactional, exclusionary systems.
And here is where the source material draws a brilliantly uncomfortable parallel for you, the listener.
It really hits close to home.
It does. The text bridges this ancient historical event to our modern everyday psychology. It states, and this is a quote, "He is still in the business of clearing out the noise in our lives so we can return to the simplicity of prayer and presence."
Yeah.
Think about your own life right now. We don't have literal livestock vendors in our living rooms.
Well, I hope not.
Right. But the amount of internal commerce happening in our heads is just staggering.
The modern attention economy is arguably the most aggressive marketplace in human history.
Absolutely. We are constantly engaged in the transaction of our attention. We trade our inner peace for an hour of doom scrolling.
Yep.
We trade our ability to be present with our families for the productivity anxiety of checking work emails at 9 p.m. We trade deep, meaningful connection for the cheap, superficial dopamine hits of social media validation.
It's constant.
Our internal temple, our mind, our heart, is absolutely packed floor to ceiling with vendors trying to sell us a cheaper, faster version of fulfillment.
The text is identifying distraction and commodification as the primary barriers to transcendence.
It really is.
It is arguing that you cannot achieve a pure dwelling place with a gentle sweep. You can't just lightly organize the noise. The text demands an overturning of the tables. It requires an aggressive, intentional disruption of the systems that keep you distracted.
It's basically screaming, stop trying to navigate the maze, stop buying into the cheap substitutes, and clear the room.
Right.
And structurally, for this 7-day narrative, this makes perfect sense. Sunday establishes ultimate authority. Monday clears away all the external and internal transactional garbage.
Which leaves the individual completely bare, stripped of distractions, and perfectly positioned for the deeply difficult psychological surrender that the text demands on Tuesday.
Which brings us to a conceptual bridge that, frankly, many people find incredibly difficult to cross.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Once the space is cleared, what is asked of the individual? The text moves into Tuesday, titled The Life in the Seed, anchoring its argument in John chapter 12, verse 24. And it does this by shifting from architectural metaphors to agrarian ones.
And I'll be honest, this is where the text actively starts fighting against my own modern sensibility.
Oh, completely.
The core proposition here uses the natural world to explain spiritual mechanics. The verse states that unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it bears much fruit.
The text is presenting a total uncompromising paradox.
Yes.
It explicitly states God's greatest victories often look like defeats to the world. It is arguing that the path to vitality, to true spiritual multiplication, requires the absolute fundamental surrender of the self.
I have to push back on how wildly unnatural this feels for anyone listening today.
Please do. It goes against everything we're taught.
Right. If you are listening to this on your commute, or while you're at the gym, or if you're trying to build a career or a family, your entire biological and cultural instinct is self-preservation and accumulation.
We want to grow.
We are conditioned from birth to grow visible branches.
Yeah.
We want to be the towering oak tree immediately. We want the shade, the status, the visible markers of success. We want the life hack.
Exactly.
But the text looks at all that and says, no, you have to be the buried, decaying seed first. It's a complete 180-degree reversal of every human success metric we have.
It is the ultimate demand for vulnerability. And
Yeah.
if we closely examine the biology of a seed, which the text intentionally utilizes as its core metaphor, the process is actually quite violent.
Oh, scientifically speaking, it's brutal.
It is. For a seed to germinate, its hard outer shell, the seed coat, designed specifically to protect it from the outside world, must be compromised. It has to crack open.
Right.
The endosperm inside is literally consumed and destroyed to provide the initial energy for the new embryo to push through the dark soil. The seed fundamentally ceases to exist in its original, safe, self-contained form.
The seed ceases to exist in its original safe form. That is an incredibly heavy psychological reality to face.
It really is.
The text identifies the central figure as the ultimate seed that died so that we might live. It is actively predicting the Friday execution, but is framing it not as a political assassination, but as a necessary law of spiritual physics.
You literally cannot have the harvest without the destruction of the seed.
The text is radically reframing the concept of defeat. In the Roman worldview of the first century, and frankly in our hyper-competitive worldview today, being crushed, buried, and killed is the ultimate undeniable failure.
It means you lost.
It is the end of the story. But the text argues that within this specific divine economy, being buried isn't a failure. It is the required prerequisite for new life. Tuesday is entirely about establishing the absolute necessity of ego, death, and surrender.
Which makes the pivot to the next day so tragically human.
It's a harsh transition.
Because Tuesday asks for this total, selfless, terrifying surrender, and then Wednesday holds up a mirror to show us exactly what happens when someone refuses to let their ego die. The text labels Wednesday the price of betrayal, referencing the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26.
Historically, scholars and traditions call this Spy Wednesday,
Oh, that's fitting.
and it reads very much like an espionage thriller. The narrative details Judas Iscariot, a man within the absolute innermost circle of disciples, sneaking away to the chief priests to broker a backdoor deal,
It's just slipping out in the dark.
trading the central figure of the narrative for 30 pieces of silver.
30 pieces of silver. And whenever I hear that, it just sounds so insultingly cheap.
Well, the economic context makes it even more mundane, honestly.
How much was that worth?
Under ancient Jewish law, 30 pieces of silver was the traditional compensation paid to an owner if their slave was gored by an ox. It was the baseline price of a common slave. It was enough money to matter to a working-class person, sure, but in the grand geopolitical scheme of things, it was entirely unremarkable.
So he sold him out for basically pocket change to the empire.
And that mundanity is exactly where the text extracts a profound psychological insight. The source explicitly states, Jesus is often betrayed not by our enemies, but by the things we value more than him.
Let's just sit with that line for a second. Betrayed not by our enemies, but by the things we value more than him. That completely shifts the blame from this shadowy historical villain of Judas to something incredibly common and relatable.
It forces you to look at yourself.
It does. It forces the listener to look inward. The source directly prompts us to ask, are we seeking this figure for who he is or for what we think he can get us?
It is a devastating indictment of transactional relationships. Let's look at Judas's probable motivations here.
Okay, let's break that down.
Judas followed this teacher. When the teacher was multiplying bread, healing the sick, and seemingly building momentum to overthrow the Roman occupation, Judas likely wanted a military conqueror.
He wanted a winner.
Right. But as the narrative shifts, as the teacher starts talking about dying like a buried seed, about suffering and submission, the perceived value of the relationship drops for Judas.
The stock is plummeting in his eyes.
Exactly. He realizes he isn't getting the kingdom he wanted. So he cashes out, he liquidates his spiritual investment, he trades the eternal for the immediate, the relational for the highly transactional.
It's the ultimate fair-weather friend dynamic, but with cosmic stakes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's like having someone in your life who only hangs out with you when you're picking up the check or when you can introduce them to influential people.
Right.
The literal second you lose your job or you get sick or you need them to sacrifice something for you, they vanish. They never valued your inherent worth. They only valued the utility you provided.
They wanted the perks.
The text is holding up this mirror to the listener and asking, are you in this for the fundamental relationship, or are you just here for the perks?
And if we contrast Tuesday and Wednesday, the philosophical divergence is stark. Tuesday provides the model of ultimate surrender, the seed willingly falling into the dark, crushing earth for the sake of future multiplication.
Yeah.
Wednesday is the tragic, violent failure of surrender. Judas refuses to let his expectations die. He refuses the vulnerable path of the seed, opting instead to preserve his own immediate interests, his own ego, for the price of a slave.
Now think about the emotional and psychological state of the narrative as we cross into Thursday. The tension is at a breaking point.
It's palpable.
You have the unstoppable king on Sunday, the violently pure temple on Monday, the dark prophecy of death on Tuesday, and the knife in the back on Wednesday.
Right.
If I am the leader in this scenario, and I know for a fact that my inner circle is currently selling me out to the authorities, human instinct dictates a very specific response.
You go on the defensive.
Absolutely. My walls go up. I go into intense self-preservation mode. I lash out. I purge the disloyal members. I consolidate my power.
Which is precisely why Thursday's text is perhaps the most shocking behavioral inversion in the entire week.
It makes no sense from a human standpoint.
Because the narrative completely ignores human instinct. Instead of building walls, the text presents a radical, almost uncomfortable display of vulnerability and service. We enter the events of Thursday, which the text titles A New Commandment. based on John chapter 13.
Historically known as Maundy Thursday.
Yes.
And the core information our source provides here states that the ultimate hallmark of a follower in this framework is not a rigid set of rules or theological purity, but the sheer depth of their love for one another.
The teacher gives a literal new commandment. Love one another, just as I have loved you.
And the context the source provides for how he demonstrates this love is mind-blowing. It notes, on the night he was betrayed, Jesus washed feet and shared a meal, redefining power as service.
The phrase, redefining power as service, cannot be overstated here. To understand the shock of this, we must understand ancient Near Eastern hospitality customs.
Right, because washing feet sounds nice, but back then,
It was not just a nice gesture. The roads in the first century were unpaved, dusty, and heavily trafficked by livestock. They were covered in animal refuse. People wore open sandals.
oh, your feet were gross.
They were objectively filthy. Washing the feet of guests was a necessary hygiene practice, but it was considered so degrading that it was explicitly reserved for the absolute lowest-ranking Gentile servant in the household.
It was literally the bottom of the barrel.
Yes. So, for the person who, just 4 days prior, accepted the praise of the universe as the creator, for the recognized master and teacher to stand up during the meal, take off his outer garments, wrap a servant's towel around his waist, and physically wash the grime off the feet of the subordinates who were actively failing him.
It's unthinkable.
It is a staggering subversion of every known social hierarchy, and he washes the feet of Judas, knowing the betrayal has already been set in motion.
The modern equivalent is almost impossible to wrap my head around. Imagine a Fortune 500 CEO.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
On the exact day he discovers his entire board of directors is orchestrating a hostile takeover, leaking his private information, and actively stabbing him in the back, he doesn't call his lawyers.
Right.
He walks down to the lobby, takes the mop bucket from the night janitor, and spends the evening scrubbing the floors for the executives who are betraying him. And doing it not as some passive-aggressive PR stunt, but as a genuine, tender act of care.
That's a powerful image.
The text insists that true power has nothing to do with dominance. It isn't about crushing your enemies or flexing your authority. True power is having the security to get your hands dirty to serve the very people who are actively destroying you.
And importantly, the text makes a vital distinction regarding human capacity when it issues this new commandment to love.
Because we can't do that on our own.
Right? The source argues that believers aren't asked to generate this kind of love through their own sheer willpower. It says he asks them to simply let his love for us overflow into the lives of those around us.
Overflow, yeah.
Philosophically, this is a crucial mechanism. It acknowledges that baseline human love is deeply conditional and transactional, exactly like we saw with Judas on Wednesday.
Yep.
To love an enemy, to serve a betrayer, requires an external source. The text claims it requires being so filled with the unmerited sacrificial love of the divine that it naturally spills over the edges of your own capacity and onto others.
I love that concept of overflowing instead of muscling through it. Because let's be real, if I have to muscle through loving someone who just deeply betrayed me, I am going to fail.
We all would.
My willpower will tap out. My ego will get in the way. But if the love is an overflow of a massive reservoir that was freely given to me, the entire dynamic changes. It's not my limited supply I'm drawing from.
Yeah.
And the text argues that the ultimate proof of that massive reservoir, the undeniable demonstration of exactly how far that love is willing to go, happens the very next morning.
We arrive at the climax of the narrative, Friday.
Yeah.
The text labels this day the greatest gift, anchoring it with arguably the most universally recognized verse in the text, John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son.
We call it Good Friday, which, given the sheer brutality of what occurs, really highlights the ultimate paradox of this entire 7-day journey.
The naming is incredibly ironic on the surface.
It marks the darkest day, a day where, according to the source material, the heart of the Father was poured out in the blood of the Son. The source explicitly outlines the cost. He took the nails, the public shame, and the physical agony of the cross so humanity wouldn't perish.
What is analytically essential here is the text's assertion that God's love is not a feeling but a sacrificial action.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. In modern culture, we heavily conflate love with emotion. We view it as a warm sentiment, a feeling of deep affection, or romantic attachment.
Like butterflies in your stomach.
Right. But the text completely strips love of mere sentimentality. It radically redefines love as a calculated, agonizingly costly sacrifice for the benefit of the unworthy.
Wow.
The cross is framed by the narrative not as an unfortunate tragic end to a brilliant philosopher's life, but as the ultimate, irrefutable historical proof of this active, sacrificial definition of love.
There is a specific phrase from the source material that I want to highlight because it changes the entire lens through which we view this execution. It calls Friday the rescue mission of the ages.
I love that phrasing.
That framing is incredible. It completely removes the victimhood from the narrative. It frames the crucifixion not as an accident where a good man was just swallowed up by a corrupt Roman justice system and an angry religious mob.
Right, he wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Exactly. It frames it as a deliberate, highly tactical military operation. Think about a hostage situation. The elite rescue team doesn't accidentally wander into a firefight.
They know what they're walking into.
Right, they intentionally, methodically walk directly into the danger zone, knowing they will take fire specifically to extract the hostages. The text is claiming that this figure intentionally walked into the meat grinder of the Roman execution machine to ensure that, as the source boldly states, death never has the final word.
That tactical framing is deeply supported by the overarching architecture of the narrative.
He laid the groundwork all week.
Exactly. He predicted this exact mechanism on Tuesday with the seed metaphor. He initiated the sequence of events on Sunday. He forced the issue on Monday.
He was pulling the strings.
The text portrays him not as a helpless pawn of the state, but as a sovereign king who is actively, purposefully laying down his life to achieve a very specific cosmic objective: the extraction and rescue of humanity from the absolute finality of death.
Death never has the final word.
Yeah.
That is the monumental promise of Friday. But, and this is where the narrative tension stretches to its absolute breaking point for the reader, while the text claims death doesn't have the final word, the immediate agonizing aftermath looks exactly like a final, immovable, concrete ending.
Which brings us to the psychological crux of the entire week. We transition from the visceral, bloody agony of Friday to the profound, suffocating emptiness of Saturday.
The waiting.
The text titles this period the sealed silence, referencing Matthew chapter 27.
The language in the 90-second preview text is incredibly evocative here. It simply says, a sealed tomb, a heavy stone, a world waiting in the dark.
It's so bleak.
The core narrative tells us that, as far as the world is concerned, the story is definitively over. The Romans have put their official imperial seal on the tomb, they rolled a massive multi-ton stone in front of the entrance, and they posted an armed guard. It is total, absolute lockdown.
Let's explore the deep psychological and symbolic weight of this silent Saturday. The Roman seal wasn't just wax,
Right.
It was a warning from the most powerful, violent empire on the face of the earth. It meant, do not touch this. This situation has been finalized by the supreme authority of Rome. To alter this is to declare war on the emperor.
It's the ultimate do not enter sign.
Precisely. The heavy stone represents a physical, immovable, entirely insurmountable barrier. And the text doesn't shy away from this bleak reality. It acknowledges that there are periods in the human experience where, as the source says, God seems completely silent and the tomb is definitively sealed.
I want to bring this right down to the listener's level because I think Saturday is the most universally relatable part of this entire ancient text.
We've all been there.
Think about those moments in your own life when you feel entirely hopelessly stuck. You are weighed down by your own massive, immovable stones. Maybe it's a terrifying medical diagnosis that offers no hope. Maybe it's sitting in the empty house after the sudden, shattering end of a marriage. Maybe it's a catastrophic career failure that just leaves you sitting in the dark. And the silence from the universe, the silence from heaven, is absolutely deafening.
It's crushing.
You prayed, you believed, you tried to follow the rules, and the result was a sealed tomb. It feels in every cell of your body like the story is over.
That is the raw, unvarnished human experience of Saturday. Grief, waiting, and silence.
But the text does something amazing here.
It does. It offers a brilliant, radical reframe of that specific psychological state. It argues that while the surface looks completely static, cold, and dead, the divine architect is actively working beneath the surface.
I love that.
The source material uses a truly beautiful metaphor here.
Yeah.
It insists that the crushing silence of Saturday isn't the end of the book. It's simply the deep breath before the miracle.
The deep breath before the miracle. I want everyone listening to just hold on to that phrase. When you are watching an Olympic diver, right before they plunge off the highest platform to execute something physically incredible, there is that massive intake of air.
And that pause.
Yes, a split second of complete, tense, absolute stillness. To the untrained eye, it looks like nothing is happening. But in reality, it is the intense gathering of energy for the main event.
That's beautifully put.
The text is making the audacious claim that the silence of God in your darkest, most agonizing moment isn't absence, it isn't abandonment, it's the gathering of breath.
If we pull back and look at the overarching architecture of the whole text, this is the ultimate test of the framework. It is about the promise that the king is still fully in control, even when the lights go out.
It requires so much trust.
It demands a tremendous amount of trust from the reader. It is stating that the ultimate reality is following a figure who, as the wrap-up text confidently states, turns every Friday into a Sunday. But the crucial, inescapable catch is that to get from the agony of Friday to the victory of Sunday, you are required to endure the agonizing tension of Saturday.
Let's trace this incredible narrative arc one last time, looking at the psychological inversions the 90-second preview mapped out for us. We started on Sunday with the unstoppable cosmic shouts of victory, claiming an authority so absolute that the rocks themselves are ready to cry out.
Then Monday, the holy, aggressive clearing of the temple, demanding a pure internal space completely free of the transactional noise that commodifies our peace.
Tuesday gave us the terrifying, violent biological metaphor of the dying seed, the absolute necessity of ego death and self-surrender to achieve true growth.
Followed immediately by Wednesday's tragic foil, the espionage and betrayal for 30 mundane pieces of silver, highlighting the profound danger of valuing the utility of what God gives over the intrinsic value of who God is.
Thursday radically dismantled and redefined human power structures, showing the creator of the universe washing the literal filth off the feet of his betrayers, commanding a love that must overflow from an external reservoir.
Friday presented the agonizing proof of that love. The rescue mission of the ages, where love is redefined not as a warm feeling, but as a bloody, calculated, sacrificial action to defeat death.
And finally, Saturday. The heavy pause, the sealed Roman tomb, the deep, agonizing breath in the dark.
As we synthesize all these sources, what we are left with is a masterful, fiercely cohesive narrative entirely built on the concept of inversion.
Everything is flipped.
Every single day of this text upends natural human expectations. Ultimate victories look exactly like absolute, humiliating defeats. Supreme power is defined entirely as humble, degrading service. And profound, terrifying silence functions as a pregnant prelude rather than a final ending.
It is a complete structural rewiring of how we perceive success, how we process failure, and how we survive the agonizing waiting periods in between. This collection of texts doesn't just tell an isolated historical story about a teacher in the first century. It provides a comprehensive philosophical lens through which to view your entire life.
It really does.
It argues that your darkest, most silent, most hopeless moments are not empirical evidence of abandonment, but the active staging ground for a rescue operation.
And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over as we close.
Let's hear it.
The text intentionally leaves us suspended on Saturday. It assures us that the story isn't over yet, and that Sunday the resurrection is inevitably coming. But it begs a fascinating psychological question for you, the listener, to explore in your own daily life. How much of our actual human experience is spent living in the unresolved tension of a silent Saturday?
That is the reality, isn't it? Most of life isn't the dramatic Friday crisis or the triumphant Sunday miracle. It's the long, quiet waiting room in between the two.
Exactly. So if we truly internalize the radical philosophy of this text, if we adopt the framework that the silence is genuinely just the deep breath before a miracle, and that the architect is actively working beneath the surface of the soil like a germinating seed, how does that fundamentally alter the way we sit in the dark when the stone in front of us feels entirely too heavy to move?
Wow.
Does it transmute our panic into patience? Does it change our despair into a quiet, watchful, almost defiant anticipation?
Does it change our despair into a defiant anticipation? That circles us right back to the beginning of our deep dive today. We are so heavily conditioned by the cultural script where victory must be loud, immediate, and obvious.
We want the parade.
We want the parade. But this text invites us into a vastly different architecture, a story where the hero wins by willingly dying, where power is holding a dirty towel, and where the climax of the narrative is a profound, holy silence. It challenges us to stop staring at the heavy stone in defeat and start listening closely for the deep breath.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an absolute privilege to unpack the architecture of this incredible narrative arc with you. Until next time, keep questioning the script, keep overturning the tables of your own noise, and we will catch you on the next one.